One of the things I absolutely adore about gardening as an artist is how much like the creative process it is, how engaged we have to be on a holistic level, and that it's always in process. There's not ever really a finishing point, at least not the way I'm learning to garden. It's dynamic, it's a give and take, and it's constantly changing with the seasons and the different life that moves through their cycles within the ecosystem. My name's Haley, and I'm learning how to garden on a rental property in Western North Carolina. Our garden feeds us every day, teaches me every day, and I'm learning as I go. So let's take a look at the June garden. Quickly, at the beginning of the month, my main tomato bed became my tomato forest. It was so dense with greenery and what have you, and had grown so tall so quickly that I was a little bit worried about how to handle it, but decided to do some pruning on the lower side of things, especially on the indeterminate string trellis tomatoes. And that really cleaned things up underneath, which I think will really help in the long term. One of the big highlights this month was harvesting the garlic that I had planted last fall. Now, this was my second time trying to grow garlic. The first time did not go so great. It had much different growing conditions, though. I tried it in a very shallow bin the first year, and we had a really hard freeze, and I planted like 30 cloves and got maybe 10 small, not very impressive cloves at all last year. This time I planted 30 cloves again and got 26 very nice bulbs out of the beds that I put them in. So I was quite pleased. One of my goals this year was to braid my garlic, so I let them cure for just a few days to dry up a bit. From what I understand, some people will let them cure for a lot longer, some of them before braiding, and some will just do the few days or a week or so that those strands are still really pliable as you braid them. That's what I went with. I found a nice tutorial to help me along. I found myself wishing I had an auntie or a granny to teach me. It did take some time, but it was really an enjoyable process. I did not clean my clothes as well as you can. Some get them really pristine white. I left a little bit of that outer layer on, and I'm not worried about it. I'm not like putting this in for some beauty contest or anything. But it took me a little bit to get the hang of the braiding rhythm. And my braids are nothing to brag home about, but they did come out pretty good. And you can look at it and go, yeah, that's an attempt at a braid. My second one was definitely better, and I was really quite pleased with it. Now they're hanging in our kitchen. Everything in my garden was started by seed, by me, inside or outside. And so I had a lot of seed packets to put away as I'm trying lots of different things. And I will be starting more seeds in the summer for the fall garden, but needed to get organized before that. My niece came to stay with me for a night. It was a lot of fun. And one of the things we got to do was see if there were any potatoes in 3 of my potato bags. This is a little bit early, but these potato stems had shown some rot from the massive amount of rain we'd gotten in the spring. So while the greenery was mostly gone on these plants, I still actually had some potatoes in there, and they are small, most of them, but edible and delicious. The flavor of homegrown potatoes is so good, and it's such a gratifying harvest, this part of the gardening. If you have a chance to grow potatoes, they're not wildly expensive in the store or anything, but this is a very gratifying food to grow, easy to do in grow bags, and just a lot of fun. Now, right as we were rolling around the summer solstice, I discovered blossom and rot in my tomato forest. It was a sad moment. This is largely a watering issue and the inability to uptake the calcium that the plants need. It's my understanding. It's my first time, well, it's not my first time dealing with it. It is my first time trying to deal with it. I've had this issue before when I was just, gardening kind of as a hobby, and I really didn't address it or look into it. I just kind of let things go. But this time I'm trying different things. Now, here you'll see me crushing up some Tums for some calcium to make a foliar spray. I've heard and learned on YouTube, various places, that this can work. And then I've also heard that it doesn't do anything at all because the leaves can't actually take the calcium to the fruit. So scientists, please pipe in. But I went ahead and tried it because I had that on hand and it felt proactive. It's very dry time in the season. So what the heck, give it a shot. Well, I was waiting on my garden lime and the food to address the actual watering issue within the soil. So with the dry heat we've had, and I do mostly hand watering, I think that the watering piece is a big piece of the issue, especially the way it went from wet to very dry very quickly in the season. So we'll see. Hopefully the plants are healthy. Hopefully this will nip it in the bud. And so now here we are toward the end of June, and this is just the little garden tour part. Those were some of the things that I dealt with in the garden this month. There's many. There's always many in the garden. Every day there's something new to learn and to try and to just observe, learn from, pay attention to, tend, what have you. Here we're looking at one of my garden areas. Again, lots of heat and dryness were happening. I've had a lot of cabbage worm and caterpillar pressure. I mentioned that in the last video, but I still actually got some small heads. Now that one you see is not one that's going to make it, but I got some decent, like small to medium sized heads that were edible and delicious that we've eaten. The acorn squash here was doing pretty good, has a fruit, but what I'm seeing on a lot of my squash plants is really common around here is pest pressure. I haven't seen the squash bug itself, but I've definitely seen cucumber beetles, and I'm suspicious of squash vine borers in some of my plants. I mentioned the garlic that was harvested. Of course, you can still see lots of onion in the far bed with the peppers. Here we go. And I also have peppers in pots. I'm doing a lot of experimenting with plants in raised beds and the same plant in a pot and in different microclimates of my garden. And this is one of the ways that I'm just really kind of nourishing how much I can learn in a season. And I love it. I love it. It keeps me on my toes. And then I do have these peppers here have been this relay planting. I've been really pretty happy with that. With the garlic and the peppers, I'll do less onions if I do the onions in there again for relay planting in the future. So it's a little bit less dense for the peppers, but they're starting to really kind of take off in their height now too. And so they're catching up with the ones that are in pots, in their own little pots by themselves. This here is a large spaghetti squash vine, which I just adore. It's just gone crazy. It's not the sunniest location, but he's done really quite well there. No fruit yet on this one, and then I'll show you soon. I do have one with a fruit, but that one's not going to make it, and that's just really sad. Here is a comfrey plant that I've had for many years here, actually. I did plant this one maybe over a decade ago, and it comes back every year. And I'm about to take off some of those lower layers of leaves to add to compost and make some tea, perhaps as some food for the garden. It's a really good plant for that. And then over here, I also have some lemon balm. There's chives in there. You can't really see those. But I'll also say, I'm doing this voiceover because we have a lot of traffic in the front of our house. There's a good span of yard there, but the traffic is still quite loud on the recordings. And here is one of my bean vines. This is a purple bean. We grew these last year. Again, I'm seeing pest pressure. You can see these holes here. I suspect earwigs because I've seen them in various parts of my yard. Anybody out there know? Have you seen this particular type of hole? Does that look like earwig damage to you? I have yet to go out at night and do some earwig hunting, but I think that that's probably what it is. And however, we have gotten beans. I pulled the first ones just this past week and to help promote some more growth on these vines. Up on the porch here, we have one of my green stalks, the experimental one, as I'm calling it this year. And I have beans now growing on the beans that are in one tier of this, sorrel and marigolds. I've planted some lettuce starts, heat-tolerant variety in there. You can see a little baby bean in there, I believe. Yeah, so these are bush beans, and these are actually doing really well in here. And then I have 2 micro tomato plants, and I grew these last year in pots, their own pots. These ones, though, in my green stock are actually like twice the size already of the ones that I had last year, and they have some, green fruit starting as well. And then, of course, I have some herbs over here, which I love growing, and they're doing great. Like I mentioned, all of my tomatoes in pots or the raised beds have grown quite a bit and have shown flowering and fruiting, though the flowering has slowed a little with the heat too. Here's that tomato forest side. This is kind of what I consider my main garden. It's actually in technically the front yard, though we don't use the front door. And here, I actually pulled out a borage plant that was in here. It had a stem that looked like something had gotten it. It was really kind of rotted and eaten through, and so that one came out. It had grown almost 4 foot tall too, so it was something. But yeah, everything's looking pretty healthy considering, but I am dealing with that blossom end rot, so we'll see. My tomatillo plants are doing quite well. A lot of fruit starting on them. Kind of just love those little lantern shells that they grow in. They're so cool. And then I have some leeks growing. They don't look so great, but they actually are about an inch in width and they taste quite delicious. So those are okay. I think the heat's gotten to them a bit. This is the bean teepee we had really good luck with last year. I've got the Kentucky Wonder beans in there again this year. We just pulled some of the first ones of those to encourage more growth. And it does quite well, even though it gets high shade in the afternoon. So it gets nice morning sun, but the shade in the afternoon. This is my first attempt at celery. Now the one on the left has some curling of leaves and falling over. I'm not sure if it's a pest or what have you, but they seem to be growing well otherwise, those other two. So yeah. Well, this raised bed is in transition a bit. I took the peas out of two sides this month, the snap peas, and here you see a nice nasturtium that's growing. And in there, I had also planted some cucumber starts. And there was a kale tucked behind the peas that really just is thriving, I think because of the shade that the peas provided for the first part of the year especially. Thai basil, a really gargantuan marigold plant. And yeah, so it's just a little bit in transition. I did put an extra tomato we had in there, and it's it's all doing just fine. The cilantro is going to seed, which I'm going to collect those seeds. And yeah, the kale, again, really beautiful for given the heat and everything, but also still delicious. And these cucumbers are actually pickling cucumbers, so they never get too tall or anything. And the cucumbers are, 4 inches, 3, 4 inches when I pull them usually. Perfect for two people if you just want a cucumber for a salad. You can with them, but we don't eat a ton of relish or anything, so it's not something I can too often. These are the tomato plants in these big pots I have. One of my favorite varieties is a German green. Discovered it and grew it last year. So delicious. You eat it green, but it's sweet. And then that's a new black cherry tomato I'm growing. And here's the other side of that tomato forest bed. It's a 4 foot by 8 foot bed. And on this side, you can see more of the determinate tomatoes. Again, I really put them in densely this year. There's tons of determinate tomato fruit growing in there. It's hard to see. You kind of have to part the leaves. But yeah, I'm hopeful that that will be good for preserving. There is less of a blossom end rot issue on the determinant side, and I think it is because this side is actually a bit denser, and I think perhaps that's helped hold in the moisture better on the soil. That's just my theory. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but they're very close to the indeterminates that are showing the blossom end rot. The watering schedule has been the same, but they do seem to be, tolerating it better. So. Here is a tomato plant in a pot. This one has had some weird curling of the leaves, and I've heard of this being an issue with, herbicides or what have you being in soils that you mix. And I do use a variety of soils. It's a little bit different everywhere in my garden. But this variety is also one that the seeds were given to me for free, and I grew it last year. While the fruit was really good that did make it, it just wasn't quite as hardy or disease or pest resistant as some of the other varieties. This one's the Ava purple, but you can still see it's growing fruit and it just has this curly leaf issue. Any thoughts or wisdom on that is welcome as well. Now over here, this is probably my favorite squash plant at the moment. This is an acorn squash. It's just gotten huge, and it does have a beautiful dark fruit in there growing. Yeah, it's just lovely. Over here, though, is that second spaghetti squash plant. It has a nice fruit started, but somewhere along the line, I think maybe a borer or something has gotten in there and it just hasn't come back. There's brown on the stem. I don't think it's going to get any new growth. I'm going to be pulling this one, I'm pretty sure, which makes me very sad because that squash was looking so good to start. I just wish it had gotten bigger. Here's that lettuce green stalk I have outside the kitchen door. All the lettuce now is new starts. We ate off of that for months, the lettuce that was growing, and now I've got new starts. Some different heat varieties are what I'm trying for the summer. Of course, I have the herbs and marigolds up top too. But I'm trying, let's see, Jericho, Capitan, Freckles, and then going with some others that have been heat tolerant. Of course, you can see I have a little bit of pest damage in there too. Again, I've seen an earwig or two in the green stalk, and so they're just munching on things here and there. But otherwise, this location has been really good for growing lettuce because it's mostly shaded. A little bit of morning light, a little bit of afternoon, mostly shade. This is one of our rain barrel setups. We have a couple. I collect water. Like I said, I do a lot of hand watering, and I'm always watering with what we've collected before I turn the hose on. Get my exercise that way too, I'll tell you what. But with the rain barrels drying up, because it's been so dry, it was perfect time to put in a little bit of an elevation here, and I'm actually going to get a third barrel, like a trash can, to collect even more water when it does rain. Yeah, so this is just a new setup for us that I'm really pleased with. It'll make it much easier to use this system. The back here is what I consider my third garden zone or area. And we have some things that are coming in wild, like the mullein here. It's in a flowering year. It's been with us for several years now in the back. And then another one that we let grow, at least one each year, we let go very tall, is poke. I've stopped feeding the birds here, but they absolutely adore the pokeberries once they turn red. Initially, though, they're this really cool green on a pink stem. These get so tall. You can use it for medicine with the practitioner who knows what they're doing. It is also food when it's below the knee height that we can actually blanch it and then eat it. That's been an old folk food for a long time here. And then it makes ink and that, and it's just a very pretty plant. Got lots of poppies that have been blooming and now poppy seed heads. I'll be collecting those and sprinkling them everywhere I go because I think poppies are beautiful. Now, it's been a couple weeks since I harvested those first bags of potatoes. My red potatoes are still doing great. Even the gold ones I left that weren't rotted in the stem, they're continuing to hang on with good watering. Potatoes, again, they're amazing because, I don't know, like you can see here, I actually have a lot of flea beetles. They finally found my potatoes. And last year I had quite a few pests on my potatoes too. And even started some early blight last year before I harvested them, but it didn't matter. I mean, the potatoes really hung in there and I would, prune them and water them efficiently. And then you still get a harvest. You still get produce from them. So again, a little bit in love with growing potatoes. It's just interesting and kind of mysterious because you don't know what it's doing under the soil till you pour it. And so a lot of fun. A couple cucumber plants here that are doing okay. Definitely we're eating off of them. These ones are, bigger cucumbers, market more, and then one other new kind this year. But my cucumbers and my zucchini and summer squash have all stayed really quite small. I have eaten some zucchini, that's good, but the plant now seems to perhaps be infested with the vine borer, I believe. I have second starts of these going, and some people in my zone, in my area and in the southeast, they don't even plant early plantings of these things in their home gardens because it's just such a pain in the butt keeping up with the pests or what have you. Or they'll do succession planting, which is what I'm trying. I'm going to try to do 2 or 3 rounds this year and compare how those go throughout the changing season. You can actually see on there just a little bit of a wound and maybe some frass there, which is a sign of those borers, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But some people do a little bit of surgery on their stem and try to get that larva out of there and what have you. I might give that a try. We'll see. I don't know. And then here I have 6 bags and 12 plants of sweet potatoes. They love the heat. They don't care. As long as you keep them watered, they're just like going to thrive in the heat. So finally, I'll just share this little spot I made here with a greenhouse, took the plastic off, and I am growing another type of bean here in a slightly different microclimate around the house. This is a Cherokee pole bean that I'm trying in a little pot in the back and using that greenhouse as a trellis. Got some beans started there, excited about that. Yeah, and I rather like how this looks actually as it's a unique trellis. I have a lot of unique trellises in my garden, just working with what we have. It's a lot of fun. Finally, as I'm editing these videos, we are now just getting a little bit of rain again, and we're supposed to get a little bit more over the next few days, so every little bit of relief will help and make the garden happier. I hope that wherever you are, whatever you might be growing, that it is doing well and thriving and moving through its process just as it should and teaching you something new.